Hey everybody, welcome to Milwaukee Music Lessons. My name is Alex Bennett, and in today's video, we are going to be continuing on in part 2 of our harmony series, going with the month's theme, and we're going to be talking about intervals. In the last lesson, we talked about the individual notes that are involved in the musical scale. We went over the chromatic scale, and just kind of talked about all the notes that are available to us, what their names are, and how you would decide where they go. What we're going to do right now, though, is we're going to talk about the distances between those notes. They make a huge difference later on when we're talking about how to create scales and chords and things of that nature. And so we're going to discuss them on a couple different levels today. We're going to start small with some very general terms, and then we're going to also talk about some bigger terms, right? And I'll try and key in on where some of the order of importance is and like which ones you need to know now versus later. Here we go. We're going to start talking about the minimum, what we need to know. So the first two intervals that you need to know are what are called the whole step and the half step. The half step is the smallest interval that we have in music. And when we're talking about how we handle it on a keyboard, this results in a note that is one key away. So if I were to start on the A and I wanted to go a half step, I can't just skip over to the B, because in between A and B, there is a B flat or an A sharp that exists in between these spaces. And so what we need to do is we need to account for that. So our distance here between A and the A sharp or the B flat, that's a half step. That's our smallest interval that we can have between ourselves, right? If I were to continue on from that B flat or that A sharp and I was to go up another half step, that would arrive at a B now, right? And that is a half step. The next one that we would take a look at here would be the distance from B to C. Now this is one of those instances where there's no black key that exists in between here. There's no sharp or flat. And so right here, this is another half step, even though there's no black key here. So again, we're just trying to analyze, we're just trying to keep track of, if there's a black key in between it, then that's our half step. And if there's none, then that's our half step. And that's our smallest interval. Now, a whole step is exactly what it sounds like. It's the distance of two half steps. So here now we end up with basically the distance of two keys, or the distance of two half steps put together. So if I were to start back at A again, and I wanted to go a whole step, our first half step is that A to A sharp, or that A to B flat, but then our second half step is A to B. That is a whole step now. If I continue on, if I start from B to C is that first half step. So to go a whole step, I have to go up to either a C sharp or a D flat. And that would be our whole step. And those are the most important intervals at the beginning, right? You can measure things either using a number of whole steps or a number of half steps. So I could say, for example, I want to go 2 whole steps. So I would go, okay, we started A, that gives us B flat is a half, B is a whole, C is a half, and now C sharp is our second whole. So A to C sharp would give us 2 whole steps, right? Or I could measure 3.5 steps. So starting from A again, actually let's start from a different spot. Let's start from C this time. So starting at C, we go up a half step to C sharp, another half step to D, that's 1 whole step. D to D sharp is a step and a half. D sharp to E is 2. E to F is 2.5. So we're getting close. We need 3.5. We're at 2.5 right now. F to F sharp is 3 in total. And finally, F sharp to G, that's 3.5 whole steps. So there's a couple different ways that you can measure various intervals, right? With just using whole steps and half steps. The whole step, half step system is important. Now, The next term that I would encourage you to learn is the distance between two notes of the same name. So if whole steps and half steps are how we measure things in like feet or inches, then the distance between two of the same note, it would be measuring something in terms of miles. So if I start here at C, this is middle C, and I go up to the next C, we've now gone around the chromatic scale once, going from one C up to the next. So we have traveled what we call an octave. So that octave just measures the distance between the first C and the next C, right? It's not like crossing the barrier of, G to A or anything like that. It's the distance from this C to this C is exactly one octave. If I wanted to travel around that cycle twice, and I went even lower with my first C and I go up to another C, now we've gone 2 octaves around, right? Or 2 musical miles, if you want to think of it that way. We've gone 2 octaves around. And so we can do that with any of these letters. Like I could start with A, and I could go to this A, and that would be 1 octave. And then if I went up to the next A, that would be 2 octaves. And if I went up to the next A, that would be 3 octaves in total that we've traveled. It's quite a distance, right? 3 octaves is more than most people can sing, and it's more than some instruments go, right? If you're on a guitar, 3 octaves is quite a lot. A guitar has like just shy of 4 octaves, generally speaking. So that's a pretty large distance to go from, to go 3 octaves across. So, that would be the next interval that I would cover. Now, at this point in time, if you are just getting introduced to these musical concepts and you don't have any prior experience, I would say the steps and the octave are as much as you need to know. But if you're looking to jump up your game, take it to the next level, or you really want to understand the intervals of like how chords and scales work to a different degree, then I would stick around for the second half of this video, because this is intervals on a little bit more of an advanced level. So octave, right? The term octave, oct is 8. And so if we start from our first note, A, and I did like an A twice in some capacity, right? That would be what's called a unison. And going up to the next A, octave, that means that we've essentially covered 8 notes getting across. So in between that unison, that 1, and that octave, that 8, we have markers 2 through 7 to be able to cover. And there's different variations and different naming conventions depending on which number you're working with, right? So let's start with the major minor intervals. So if I go our normal half step and I start from A to B flat here, this is a half step, but the more proper term for this would be a minor second, would be the distance between these 2 notes, okay? But with the second, there's still another note to give, right? We have a minor version, which is a half step, but we also have a major version, which would be 2 whole steps, or excuse me, a whole step. Sorry, misspoke there. So half step is a minor second, whole step is a major second. And if we continue up again into the thirds category, we find a repeat of that same pattern. There's a minor version and a major version. So our minor third is a step and a half, and our major third is 2 whole steps. That's what we get here, right? So we have minor seconds, major seconds, minor third, major third. With me so far? Good. So this is where things change gear a little bit. The 4th and 5th have a little bit of their own special naming conventions. Instead of minor, major, instead what we run into is we have perfect, and then we have diminished, which is kind of like the minor version here, where it's a half step lowered. Or we also have augmented, which is like pushing it up even just a little bit higher. So if I start with A and I work my way up to D, which is the next one, we ended at C sharp before. D gives us a perfect fourth, that interval right there. And if I go up again another half step, this is where we start to run into the crossroads where the 4 and the 5 kind of overlap. So here, this could be considered a diminished fifth, and in most cases it will be. But there's also the potential for an augmented fourth, is what you could get here. And then finally we move into perfect fifth. So again, we have perfect fourth, augmented fourth, diminished fifth, perfect fifth. Okay, quick recap of everything we have so far. Minor seconds, major seconds. I gotta play it right though. Quick recap of everything we've got so far here. Minor seconds, major seconds, minor third, major third, perfect fourth, diminished fifth, or possibly augmented fourth, and finally, perfect fifth. Okay, once we've made it through the fourths and the fifths, the sixths and the sevenths are repeat ideas of how the seconds and the thirds go. Basically, at this point, we enter kind of the minor major territory again. So here we have a minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, and then finally a perfect octave. And those are all of the major intervals that you need to know, especially at the beginning. These are the most important ones that you need to get covered, right? So it's going to take a little time to get used to understanding the intervals from those distances, but they do make a huge impact when you're trying to learn, especially chords. Like, if you understand these intervals really well, then you understand why they name chords the way that they do. It's really, really nice and handy to have. And as you start to learn more scales later, especially if you've just learned like the minor and major scale, then learning other scales later on, it's a huge help to be able to understand these terms. So I hope that this has been really helpful for you. Again, if you're just a beginner, focus on the first half, the half steps, the whole steps, and the octave. That's by far and away the most important one. And then if you work your way into a more advanced level later on and you want to come back to this and learn the other intervals, then that's totally fine with me. But I think that'll just about cover everything that I want to cover here with intervals. So anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be working more into actual scales in the next video, and I'm excited to start covering those categories, those lessons. So anyways, my name is Alex Bennett. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next video.